50,000 people watched Elvis Presley have a complete panic attack on stage in Houston. What started as his biggest concert ever turned into his most vulnerable moment and somehow became legendary. It was August 8, 1970, and the Houston Astrodome was about to witness something that had never happened before in rock and roll history. Elvis Presley, at the peak of his comeback, was scheduled to perform for the largest indoor concert audience ever assembled. 50,000 screaming fans packed into what they called the eighth wonder of the world. But what started as Elvis's triumphant return to massive stadium shows became the night the King nearly fell apart in front of half of Houston. By 1970, Elvis was riding high on his comeback success. His 1968 television special had reminded the world why he was called the King, and his Las Vegas residency was breaking attendance records. But with success came pressure. Pressure to be perfect, pressure to deliver, pressure to live up to the legend he'd become. The Houston Astrodome show was supposed to be the crown jewel of his tour. Colonel Parker had hyped it as the biggest show on earth, and tickets had sold out in less than 4 hours. The pressure was enormous, but Elvis had handled pressure before. What he hadn't counted on was how different it would feel to walk onto a stage and see 50,000 faces staring back at him. Backstage, Elvis's crew noticed he was acting different. Usually before a big show, Elvis would be energetic, maybe a little nervous, but excited. That night, he was unusually quiet. "Boss, you feeling okay?" asked Joe Esposito, his road manager. "Yeah, Joe. Just, damn, that's a lot of people out there." Elvis had performed for large crowds before, but never indoors. The Astrodome's acoustics created this weird echo effect where he could hear individual voices in the crowd, individual screams, individual calls of his name. Instead of one collective roar, it was like 50,000 separate conversations all happening at once. "It's like they're all looking right at me," Elvis told Charlie Hodge, his longtime friend and guitarist. "Not at Elvis Presley, the performer, but at me, like they can see right through me." Charlie thought it was just pre-show jitters. He was wrong. When Elvis's entrance music began, the crowd erupted into the loudest cheer anyone at the Astrodome had ever heard. 50,000 people on their feet, screaming, applauding, going absolutely crazy. Elvis walked out onto the stage in his white jumpsuit, and for a moment everything seemed normal. He raised his hand to acknowledge the crowd, and they got even louder. But then something strange happened. Instead of walking to the microphone to start his first song, Elvis he stood there, center stage, looking out at this massive sea of people, and he didn't move. The band, waiting for his cue to start "That's All Right," kept waiting and waiting. The crowd, thinking this was part of the show, kept cheering and screaming, but Elvis wasn't moving. What happened next was visible to everyone in that arena, but nobody understood what they were seeing. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was having a complete panic attack. His hands started shaking. His breathing became shallow and rapid. The stage lights, which he'd performed under thousands of times before, suddenly felt blindingly bright. The crowd noise, which usually energized him, became overwhelming. "I can't do this," he whispered to himself, but the words were picked up by his wireless microphone and echoed throughout the Astrodome. 50,000 people heard Elvis Presley say, "I can't do this." At first, people thought it was part of the act. Elvis was known for his spontaneous moments, his ability to connect with audiences in unexpected ways. Maybe this was some new kind of performance art, but as the seconds ticked by, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, it became clear that something was seriously wrong. Elvis was just standing there, staring out at the crowd, visibly shaking, not singing, not speaking, not moving. The band members exchanged worried looks. Charlie Hodge tried to catch Elvis's eye to see if he needed help. The backup singers, who had seen Elvis handle every kind of situation, had never seen him like this. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. James Burton, Elvis's lead guitarist, later described what those first few minutes were like from the stage. "I've been in a lot of weird situations in my career, but I'd never seen anything like that." Elvis was just frozen. Not physically frozen, but mentally, like he was trapped inside his own head and couldn't find a way out. The crowd was starting to get restless. The cheering was dying down, replaced by confused murmuring. People were asking each other what was happening. If Elvis was sick, if the show was going to start. Some people started to leave, thinking maybe there was a technical problem and the show would be delayed. But in the third row, a woman named Betty Martinez noticed something that changed everything. "He's scared," she told her husband. "Look at his face. Elvis Presley is scared." Betty Martinez did something that seemed crazy at the time, but turned out to be exactly what Elvis needed. She stood up and started clapping. Not the wild, screaming applause that Elvis usually received, but slow, steady, supportive clapping. "It's okay, Elvis," she shouted. "We love you." A few people around her heard what she said and saw what she was doing. They stood up and started clapping too. "We love you, Elvis. Take your time. We're here for you." The message began to spread through the arena. Instead of demanding a performance, the crowd was offering support. What happened next was one of the most beautiful moments in concert history. Without any coordination, without any plan, 50,000 people gradually figured out what was happening and responded with pure love. The demanding screams stopped. The restless energy calmed down. Instead, a gentle wave of supportive applause and encouraging words spread throughout the Astrodome. "You got this, Elvis. We believe in you. Just breathe." People who had paid good money to see a show were instead choosing to be part of Elvis's healing process. On stage, Elvis was still struggling with his panic attack, but he began to hear the change in the crowd's energy. Instead of pressure and expectation, he was hearing acceptance and support. Charlie Hodge walked over to Elvis and put his hand on his shoulder. "You hear that, boss?" Charlie said quietly. "They're not here to judge you. They're here to love you." Elvis looked out at the crowd, really looked at them for the first time that night. Instead of 50,000 strangers demanding a performance, he saw 50,000 people who cared about him as a human being. "They're not leaving," Elvis said, his voice filled with wonder. "No, boss, they're not leaving." After what felt like an eternity but was actually about 8 minutes, Elvis walked slowly to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice shaky but getting stronger, "I need to be honest with you about something." The arena went completely silent. "I walked out here tonight, and I saw all of you, and I got scared, really scared. I've been performing for 15 years, and I thought I knew what I was doing, but tonight I felt like I didn't know anything." The honesty in his voice was raw and vulnerable in a way that none of his recordings had ever captured. "But you know what you just taught me? You taught me that it's okay to be scared. You taught me that you're not here just for Elvis Presley the performer. You're here for Elvis Presley the person." "I want to sing you a song," Elvis said. "Not because I have to, not because it's on my set list, but because I want to. Because you've shown me what music is really about." Instead of starting with one of his big hits, Elvis sat down at the piano and began playing "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" But he sang it differently than he ever had before. He sang it like a conversation, like he was talking directly to each person in that arena. "Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight?" But when he got to the spoken word section in the middle of the song, instead of the usual lyrics, Elvis improvised. "You know, I was lonesome tonight. I was scared tonight. But you showed me that I'm not alone. None of us are alone when we're together like this." What followed was arguably the greatest performance of Elvis's career. Not because it was technically perfect, it wasn't. Not because everything went according to plan, it didn't. It was great because it was honest. Every song Elvis sang that night was infused with the vulnerability he'd shown during those 8 minutes of silence. He talked to the audience between songs, shared stories, admitted his fears, and celebrated his gratitude for their understanding. "I've performed all over the world," Elvis said at one point, "but I've never felt more at home on a stage than I do right here, right now, with all of you." The audience that night experienced something they'd never experienced at a concert before. Instead of just being entertained, they'd been part of someone's healing process. They'd helped Elvis through his crisis, and in return, he'd given them the most genuine performance of his career. People later said that concert felt more like a church service than a rock show. There was something sacred about what had happened, a moment of collective compassion that transcended entertainment. "I came to see Elvis perform," said audience member Robert Johnson. "Instead, I got to see Elvis become human. It was more powerful than any song he could have sung." The media didn't know what to make of what happened in Houston. Some critics tried to frame it as a breakdown, a sign that Elvis was losing his edge. Others called it the most authentic moment in rock and roll history. Elvis didn't care what the critics said. He knew something important had happened that night. They could have left, he told reporters afterward. When I froze up there, when I couldn't perform, they could have demanded their money back. Instead, they stayed and helped me remember why I love doing this. The Houston Astrodome incident changed how Elvis approached performing for the rest of his career. He became more willing to show vulnerability on stage, to connect with audiences as a human being, rather than just as an entertainer. After Houston, Elvis was different, said James Burton. He was more relaxed, more genuine. He'd learned that audiences didn't just want perfection, they wanted connection. Elvis started incorporating moments of honesty and vulnerability into his regular performances. He'd talk about his fears, his gratitude, his humanity, and audiences loved it. The Houston Astrodome concert was recorded, and bootleg copies have circulated among Elvis fans for decades. But it's not the songs that people treasure. It's those 8 minutes of silence and the crowd's response that make it one of the most sought-after Elvis recordings. You can hear the love in that recording, said Elvis historian Jerry Osborne. You can hear 50,000 people choosing compassion over disappointment. It's beautiful. For Elvis personally, the Houston concert was a turning point. He'd faced his greatest fear, failing in front of a massive audience, and discovered that failure didn't mean rejection. I learned something important that night, Elvis later told his close friend Red West. I learned that people don't love you because you're perfect. They love you because you're real. The panic attack that could have ended Elvis's career instead deepened his connection with his fans and made him a more authentic performer. The story of Elvis's freeze at the Houston Astrodome resonates with anyone who's ever felt overwhelmed, scared, or unprepared for a big moment. It shows us that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's humanity. More importantly, it shows us how powerful compassion can be. 50,000 people had paid to see a show, but when they realized their performer was struggling, they chose to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Today, the Houston Astrodome incident is remembered not as Elvis's moment of weakness, but as his moment of greatest strength. It took courage to admit his fear in front of 50,000 people. It took wisdom to accept their help, and it took artistry to turn that vulnerable moment into one of the greatest performances of his career. The incident also demonstrated something beautiful about audiences. When given the choice between demanding entertainment and offering compassion, those 50,000 people chose compassion. That night in Houston proved something important, said music journalist Dave Marsh. It proved that the relationship between performer and audience is about more than just entertainment. It's about human connection, and when that connection is real, magic happens. Elvis performed thousands of concerts in his career, but many who were there that night in Houston say it was the most important one they ever attended. Not because of the songs he sang, but because of the moment of honesty they all shared. In a world where performers are expected to be superhuman, where vulnerability is often seen as weakness, Elvis showed 50,000 people that it's okay to be scared, it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to ask for help. And 50,000 people showed Elvis that when someone is vulnerable with you, the right response isn't judgment or disappointment, it's love. That's a lesson that goes far beyond music. That's a lesson about being human. If this incredible story of vulnerability, compassion, and human connection moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to be scared and that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Have you ever experienced a moment when vulnerability turned into connection? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments that make us all more human.